Hi, everyone. I don't know if I'm here to confess, justify myself, or just unburden something that's been crushing my chest for days. Maybe I deserve judgment. Maybe I deserve worse. But I need to tell this story honestly from my side because the truth looks very different when you're the one who made the mistake. My name is Trisha. I'm 27 years old, and I've been married to my husband, Jacoby. Everyone calls him Jay, for 4 years. Together for 5. From the outside, our marriage probably looked perfect. Jay is the kind of man people notice the moment he walks into a room. He's tall, built like he was carved out of stone, disciplined in a way that never turns off. He served in the Marines, came home, and built a successful gym and personal training business from the ground up. People admire him. Women openly flirt with him. Men respect him. And me? I was the small, lucky wife who somehow landed him. At least, that's how it felt most days. When we first met, I was young and lighthearted. I loved how safe I felt with him. He was protective, focused, and completely devoted. When he loved fully. And for a long time, that was enough. But marriage changes things in ways no one prepares you for. Jay worked constantly. His business grew fast, and I was proud of him, genuinely. But as his schedule filled up, I started feeling like something in me was slowly fading into the background. Conversations became shorter. Dinners were quieter. His mind was always somewhere else: clients, expansion, responsibilities. He never cheated, never crossed a line. In fact, he went out of his way to prove his loyalty. Cameras in the gym, constant transparency, letting me check in whenever I wanted. Any woman would have felt secure with that level of commitment. And yet, insecurity doesn't always come from what your partner does wrong. Sometimes it comes from feeling invisible. I work in real estate. My office is lively, social, full of people who joke, complain, gossip, and vent. That's where Brian comes in. Brian works a few desks down from me. He's not my type, not physically, not emotionally. Shorter, average-looking, kind of awkward in a way that makes him unintimidating. What he was, though, was present. He listened. When I talked about my day, he didn't half-nod while checking emails. When I joked, he laughed. When I complained about clients, he sympathized. It felt easy. And I want to be clear about something because I know how this sounds. I did not start out wanting an affair. At least, not in my mind. I told myself Brian was just a friend. A coworker. Someone safe. Someone who made workdays lighter. I never hid our conversations because I genuinely didn't think they were wrong. There was no touching. No flirting, at least not anything I wanted to admit was flirting. Looking back, I see how naive that sounds. But at the time, I truly believed I was doing nothing wrong. Then one evening, Brian asked if I wanted to grab dinner the following Friday. Just dinner, he said. Maybe a movie after. Something casual. I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. Not because I wanted him, but because someone wanted my time. Instead of shutting it down, instead of saying no immediately, I hesitated. And then I said yes. The moment the word left my mouth, I felt a twinge of guilt. But I silenced it quickly. I told myself it wasn't a date. Just dinner. Just like going out with coworkers. I didn't plan to hide it. I didn't plan to cross any lines. In my head, it was harmless. That Sunday afternoon, Jay and I were at home, sharing wine, sitting close on the couch. I was unusually affectionate, clinging to him, laughing more than usual, touching his hair, kissing his cheek. If I'm honest, part of me was trying to convince myself everything was normal. And part of me was trying to soften him up before telling him. When I finally said it, casually, lightly, it felt surreal. Brian from the office asked me to dinner on Friday. You're okay with that, right? The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd expected. Jay didn't explode. He didn't yell. That scared me more. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Like I had spoken in a language he didn't recognize. When he finally asked if I was serious, I laughed nervously and doubled down on my explanation. I told him it wasn't a date. That Brian was just a coworker. That he made me laugh. That it was like grabbing drinks with friends. Even as I spoke, I could feel the tension rising. Jay tried to explain how it felt from his side, but instead of really listening, I brushed it off. I told him not to be jealous. I told him it was one night. I told him it didn't mean anything. The worst part? I had already said yes to Brian before even talking to my husband. And when Jay pointed that out, I didn't have a good answer. What happened next is something I still replay in my head at night. Jay picked up his phone calmly. Too calmly. He called a woman named Angel. I watched his expression as he spoke, and something inside me twisted. When he said the words open marriage, my stomach dropped. I hadn't said that. I hadn't meant that. But suddenly, my harmless dinner didn't feel harmless anymore. When Jay told me he was going on a date too, the hypocrisy hit me like a slap. I exploded. I screamed. I cried. I accused him of cheating. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I had wanted freedom without consequences. I wanted attention without risk. I wanted to feel desired without imagining what it would feel like to lose him. That night, Jay moved into the guest room. He told me sex was off the table. He talked about counseling, about divorce, about choices and consequences. And for the first time since I'd known him, he felt distant. Not angry, not cruel, just unreachable. I cried into my pillow after he left the room, shaking with regret that came too late. I called my sister. I begged her to tell me I wasn't a terrible person. She didn't. She told me I had crossed a line I didn't understand yet. An hour later, I went back to Jay, ready to cancel everything, ready to undo it. But it was already too late, because he wasn't canceling his date. And deep down, I knew I had started something I no longer controlled. I didn't realize then that Friday night would change our marriage forever. I just knew I was scared, and that fear was only beginning. I barely slept that week. Every night after Jay moved into the guest room, the house felt colder. Not physically, but emotionally, like the walls themselves were judging me. I kept replaying Sunday afternoon in my head, wishing I could reach back in time and swallow my words before they ever left my mouth. I canceled my date with Brian the very next day. I told him I'd made a mistake, that I shouldn't have said yes, that it wasn't appropriate. He sounded confused, embarrassed, apologetic, but relieved. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He just said he understood. I expected that canceling would fix things. It didn't. Jay didn't soften. He didn't thank me. He didn't cancel his plans either. That was the first moment I truly understood that my husband wasn't doing this to punish me. He was doing it because something inside him had broken. Every time I tried to touch him that week, he pulled away. Not harshly, not angrily, just distant. Like his body remembered loving me, but his mind hadn't caught up yet. I cried a lot. I apologized more times than I could count. I promised I'd never do something like that again. And yet, none of it changed the fact that Friday night was coming. By Thursday, I was nauseous. Jay barely spoke to me unless it was about logistics. Dinner schedules. Counseling appointments. Simple, emotionless sentences. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. On Friday afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have, trying to decide what to wear. I hated myself for caring. I chose a simple dress. Nothing revealing. Nothing bold. I didn't want to look like I was trying. Part of me hoped Jay would notice and think, she's not dressing up for anyone else. Part of me already knew it wouldn't matter. When 6 o'clock came, the doorbell rang. My heart dropped. Jay answered it. Angel stepped inside, and the air in the room changed instantly. She was tall, confident, athletic in a way that made my petite frame feel invisible. She wore a fitted dress that showed off everything she worked for. Her posture screamed self-assurance. And she looked at me like she already knew she'd won something. Jay looked different with her. Relaxed. Smiling. Alive in a way I hadn't seen all week. I hated noticing that. He introduced us calmly, like this was normal. Like this wasn't destroying me from the inside. Angel shook my hand firmly and smiled. Jay told me all about your open marriage. I think it's great you're so secure. Open marriage. The words burned. I wanted to scream that I never asked for that. that I never meant this. But my mouth refused to cooperate. Instead, I smiled weakly. Then the doorbell rang again. Brian. Seeing him standing there, awkward, nervous, clearly regretting his life choices, made everything worse. This wasn't romantic. This wasn't exciting. This was humiliating. Jay opened the door and towered over him. The size difference alone was enough to make Brian shrink. When Jay shook his hand, I could see Brian's knuckles go white. Have fun tonight, Jay said calmly. I wanted the floor to swallow me. Angel laughed lightly as Jay grabbed his jacket. He made me take pictures of them together before they left. Pictures I will never forget. Him smiling, her pressed against his side. Me standing there like an outsider in my own marriage. The door closed behind them. And just like that, I was alone with Brian. Dinner was awkward. Brian barely spoke. He kept apologizing. He looked over his shoulder constantly, like he expected Jay to appear out of nowhere. I tried to pretend I was fine. I wasn't. Every laugh I forced felt fake. Every bite of food tasted like cardboard. By the time we finished eating, I couldn't do it anymore. I told Brian I wanted to go home. He didn't argue. He dropped me off before 8 o'clock. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, curled into myself, staring at the front door, waiting. Every minute felt heavier than the last. I imagined Jay dancing with her, laughing, touching her, kissing her the way he used to kiss me. I imagined him realizing how easy it would be to replace me. I imagined losing him. By the time I saw headlights pull into the driveway, my eyes were swollen from crying. It was almost 6 in the morning. When Jay walked in, he looked content. Tired, but peaceful. Like he'd had a good night. And then I saw it. Angel leaned over and kissed him goodbye. Not a friendly peck. A slow, intentional kiss. Something inside me cracked. I don't even remember everything I said after that. I remember anger. Panic. Jealousy so sharp it hurt to breathe. I accused him of cheating. I demanded answers. He stayed calm. Too calm. He told me they hadn't slept together. That it was just a date. That they danced. Walked on the beach. Talked. That somehow made it worse. Because it meant she mattered. When he asked about my night, I could barely answer. I told him the truth. That Brian took me home early. That it was awkward. That I hated every second. Jay looked at me quietly, like he was measuring something. Then he said something that shattered me completely. You wanted him last week. What changed? I didn't have a clever response. All I had was the truth. I realized how stupid I was. I told him I never felt so replaceable. So small. So terrified. I told him I thought I could handle it and I couldn't. I told him I wanted him. Only him. Jay listened. And that silence was worse than any yelling could have been. Because I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't know if I was already too late. I had crossed a line I didn't fully understand, and now I was standing on the wrong side of it, watching my marriage tremble. I went to bed that morning not knowing if my husband was already halfway out the door. And for the first time since I married him, I understood what it felt like to truly lose control. The morning after that night didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the aftermath of something irreversible. Jay didn't come back to bed. He stayed in the guest room, and when I woke up, the house was quiet in a way that made my chest ache. No good morning kiss. No casual conversation. No normalcy to hold on to. Just distance. We started counseling the following week. I remember sitting in the waiting room, hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to prepare myself for what I would say. I had rehearsed apologies. I had rehearsed explanations. I had rehearsed tears. None of it mattered, because the truth was simpler and uglier than anything I had practiced. I had wanted attention more than I had respected my marriage. The therapist, Mrs. Williams, was calm and observant. She listened more than she spoke. When she finally asked me why I thought dinner with another man felt harmless, I struggled to answer. I told her the truth. I said I didn't see Brian as a man. Not in the way I saw my husband. To me, Brian was safe. Non-threatening. Someone who made me feel heard without making me feel guilty for needing that. I never imagined desire. Never imagined intimacy. Never imagined consequences. Mrs. Williams didn't sugarcoat her response. She told me intent doesn't erase impact. She explained that in a monogamous marriage, emotional boundaries matter just as much as physical ones. That I had prioritized my feelings over my partner's security, and that alone was enough to fracture trust. When Jay spoke, his voice was steady, but distant. He said hearing me ask to go out with another man made him feel replaceable, insufficient, like the life he had built and protected wasn't enough for me anymore. That hurt more than anything, because it was never true. But intentions don't rewrite damage. Jay admitted something that shook me deeply. He said that night with Angel made him realize how easily his life could change. How many women would step into my place, without hesitation, if he allowed it. He said it didn't make him proud, it made him numb. That word stayed with me. Numb. We continued therapy for months. From the outside, things looked better. Jay moved back into our bedroom. We laughed again. We slept together. We showed up to family events like nothing had happened. Anyone looking at us would have assumed we survived the storm. But something fundamental never fully returned. Jay became careful. He loved me, but he didn't lean on me the way he used to. He didn't share his worries as openly. He didn't look at me with blind trust anymore. I noticed it in small moments. When his phone buzzed and he turned it slightly away, not because he was hiding anything, but because he no longer felt the need to prove himself. When women flirted with him at the gym, and he didn't immediately mention it to me anymore. When I asked where he was going and he answered honestly, but without the warmth that used to come with reassurance. The most painful realization came slowly. I hadn't lost my husband. I had lost the version of him who felt completely safe with me. Angel eventually faded out of the picture. Jay stopped seeing her. She even called me once to tell me she respected our marriage and would step back completely. But the damage wasn't caused by Angel. It was caused by me. Brian and I remained co-workers. Nothing more. He was polite, distant, almost afraid of me. The idea that he once felt like an escape now embarrassed me deeply. I see now that I wasn't craving another man. I was craving validation. And instead of communicating that to my husband, I sought it somewhere easier. That choice cost me something I can't get back. Jay stayed. But the unconditional trust didn't. The innocence didn't. The feeling of being irreplaceable didn't. Some nights, I catch him looking at me thoughtfully, like he's still measuring whether I'm worth the risk of fully trusting again. And I don't blame him. I used to think regret meant losing everything. Now I understand something far worse. Sometimes regret means keeping what you almost destroyed, but knowing it will never feel the same again. I live with that every day. And if you're reading this, thinking about crossing a line because it feels harmless, because you think you can control it, please believe me. You can't. By the time you understand what you're risking, you've already lost something you didn't know how to protect.